A convicted war criminal walks free after Sweden and Iran carried out a prisoner swap. An EU diplomat and a dual national release in exchange for Hamid Nouri. He's an Iranian man found guilty in Sweden for crimes against humanity, being complicit in the 1988 mass executions in the Islamic Republic. More than 5,000 political prisoners killed. I'm Negar Mojtahedi, and this is Eye for Iran, going beyond the headlines and taking you deep into the Iran stories that matter most. We're joined now by our guest, Kaveh Shahrooz. He is an Iranian-Canadian human rights lawyer. And Mariam Claren, she is a German-Iranian human rights activist whose mother, Taghavi, has been unlawfully imprisoned in Iran since 2020. Thank you to you both for joining us.
Really good to be with you.
Kaveh, we will start with you. Just who is Hamid Nouri? And if you could share your own personal experience and tragedy with Hamid Nouri and how you're reacting right now to the news.
Sure. So Hamid Nouri is a low-level Iranian prison official. He had been working in Iran's prison system throughout the 1980s. These prison guards were particularly sort of sadistic individuals, as a lot of the prisoners will tell you. In the 1980s, as your listeners will know, it was a particularly bad time, a lot of political prisoners, a lot of torture, a lot of executions, all of which culminated in the massacre that took place in the summer of 1988. A lot of political prisoners that had been in Iran's prisons, some of them were still serving their sentences, some of them had finished their sentences already, but they were still imprisoned. They were brought before what came to be known as a death commission, usually 3 people that would decide the fate of these political prisoners in a matter of a minute or two. And Hamid Nouri, aside from his role as a prison guard, he had also sort of had a role to play in these massacres in the 1980s. Just by happenstance, some of the former political prisoners, the survivors, got wind of the fact that a few years ago he was traveling to Sweden. They, with their legal counsel, alerted the Swedish authorities. The Swedish authorities arrested Nouri and, based on a theory of universal jurisdiction, actually put him on trial in Sweden. So this was really a first with respect to Iran.
And what is universal jurisdiction? For those who don't know, what is it?
Yeah, so this is a concept that says there are some crimes in the world that are so heinous that the perpetrator could be tried anywhere. In the case of the 1988 executions and Hamid Nouri, Hamid Nouri is an Iranian citizen. The victims of the 1988 massacre were Iranian citizens. The crime took place in Iran, so there's no real connection to Sweden. But Sweden here declared that it had jurisdiction to put him on trial on the basis that, crimes against humanity and war crimes, this was tried as war crimes rather than crimes against humanity for technical reasons. War crimes are heinous enough that they can be tried anywhere. And so, he was put on trial. A lot of witnesses came forth. He was given a full defense, and the Swedish judiciary found him guilty. And this was really celebrated by the Iranian human rights community and a lot of victims and their families, because this was a first, and this was some modicum of justice for this horrendous injustice that had happened in Iran in 1988. So when I woke up in the morning and I saw the news a couple of days ago that there had been this prisoner exchange where this monster had been allowed to go back to Iran and be celebrated as some sort of hero in exchange for a couple of prisoners, it was really heartbreaking. And I think that's a feeling that a lot of people had. It was the feeling that these Western governments, like Sweden's, might talk a big game about international law and human rights, but when it really comes down to it, they pursue their own national interest and the interest of their citizens, and they devalue the lives of people in the Middle East and Iranians and so on. And it was a real feeling of betrayal, I think.
And can you share a little bit about your own personal tragedy?
Yeah. So I actually have a connection to this story, and it's one that I've talked about and written about in the past. My own uncle, my mom's brother, had been arrested in the very early 1980s. He had been a member of the MEK, the Mojtahedi organization, an organization that, I think a lot of people rightly now have problems with. I certainly do. But back in the early 1980s, I think there were a group that had a fair number of supporters. My uncle had not been involved in any armed struggle or anything. He had been a teenager. He was selling newspapers for this organization. He was arrested, not afforded anything resembling due process. He was tortured and given a 5-minute trial in the very early 1980s. And he was sentenced to 10 years in prison, of which he served 8 years in really horrendous conditions under which he became paralyzed as a result of torture in prison. And then in 1988, he was presumably brought before the Death Commission and sent to hang. We don't know the exact details. That was never shared with us. But we know that he had the same fate as a lot of other people. So, Hamid Nouri's trial, for somebody like me and members of my family, had a lot of meaning. It was a feeling that some small justice had been done in the case of our uncle. And regrettably now, even that justice has been undone.
And like you said, for handing out newspapers.
Yeah, I mean, not even a violent offense. I mean, this is, the height of injustice, as you can imagine.
And Mariam, given your own lived experience and on behalf of other hostage families, what did you make of the news of Hamid Nouri's release? And if before you answer that question, if you could also tell us a little bit about your mother and her situation.
Sure. My mother is a German national who was arrested by the intelligence wing of the IRGC in October 2020 when she was visiting her family in Iran, and she was taking a walk back home when 12 men came for her and they blindfolded her and they brought her to notorious Evin prison together with 3 of her friends. And my mom spent 200 days in solitary confinement, was interrogated more than 1,000 hours. She was faced with something that is called white torture methods, and she was convicted in a sham trial before a revolutionary court in summer 2021 to 10 years and 8 months in prisons. The charges were participating in an illegal group and propaganda against the state. She is currently being held in the women wing of Evin prison. This is the wing where all female political prisoners in Iran, in Tehran, are being held. Her cellmate is, for example, the Nobel Peace Prize winner Narges Mohammadi. And also, as you mentioned, as a hostage family, I would like to say that she's a German citizen and she's also being used as a bargaining chip to put pressure on the European Union, to put pressure on the German government. So she's not only a political prisoner, she's also victim of the so-called hostage diplomacy, which we saw in the case of Hamid Nouri's prisoner swap. And of course, it was shocking to me. I opened Twitter or I should say X, on Saturday, and 1 minute before I open it, the so-called human rights commissioner of the Islamic Republic Judiciary, Kazem Garib Abadi, tweeted in Farsi that they succeed to secure the release of Hamid Nouri. And it was so shocking. I really thought I'm not reading right. I thought my Farsi reading skills are not good enough. So I called a friend, a journalist friend, and I told him, did you see the tweet of Garib Abadi? And he was just like, no, that's impossible. And then he started checking the Farsi state media, and it was true. He was released, and I couldn't believe that because he was such a big fish. Of course, as Kaveh just mentioned, he was only a low official in the 1980s in Gohardasht prison, and he was also responsible, of course, for the mass executions of political prisoners. But his trial in Sweden and his condemnation was like the Islamic Republic of Iran. It was a condemnation for the Islamic Republic of Iran, because for the first time, the justice-seeking movement, the families of those who were executed, the survivors, the victims, felt something like justice. And he was convicted in a very, very independent, open and fair trial. He had 92 court sessions. He had access to his own lawyers. The embassy of the Islamic Republic of Iran was present at his court sessions. And the whole court was something we, the justice-seeking people of Iran, could follow. And it felt a little bit like we have reached some justice. When he was convicted to a lifetime in prison for war crimes and for murder. And as Kaveh mentioned, because of technical reasons, they couldn't convict him for crimes against humanity, but also it was confirmed in the second court that he is guilty and he is has to spend a lifetime in prison. It was shocking that such a big fish, such an important historical moment was taken from us, and the Islamic Republic. It felt a little bit like the Islamic Republic of Iran won again. They succeed to secure the release of someone like Hamid Nouri, and the most shocking part to me was that only two Swedish citizens were swapped. This is really ridiculous, because in the first place, such a deal should never have been taken place, in my opinion. But if you are dealing with this murder, Russ, if you are dealing with this regime and they want something from you, and it was clear from the very beginning that they want Hamid Nouri back. From the very beginning, it was when the court sessions of Hamid Nouri began, it was clear. So they want him back, and the only price you have is that two citizens are being released. Dr. Ahmad Reza Jalali, a Swedish citizen who is in prison since 8 years on death row, was left behind. And it's ironic that it was Dr. Ahmad Reza Jalali who was put in solitary confinement and threatened with execution 2 nights before the verdict of Hamid Nouri was given. So Amnesty International designated him as a hostage because of the case of Hamid Nouri. And the Swedish government left him behind. They not only left him behind, it was a slap in the face of all these families who went to 92 court sessions, testified in front of the court. And it was also a slap in the face to us other hostage family members, because if you are dealing with this human rights abusers, at least you should have secured the release of all European citizens who are being unlawfully detained in the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Why do you think he was left behind? What's your take?
I could answer you a very sarcastic answer. Maybe he was not Swedish enough. This is something someone wrote yesterday on X, and this is something I think maybe it's the reason. I think the Islamic Republic of Iran, after they arrested Johan Flodderus, a Swedish citizen who is also a diplomat of the European Union, who traveled as a tourist to Iran and was taken by the Islamic Republic. I think the Islamic Republic realized that maybe they can do the deal only with Johan Flodderus, and we should also ask the elephant in the room, or talk about the elephant in the room. Why did Johan Flodderus, who is part of an EU delegation of the Middle East, who knows about the hostage diplomacy in the Islamic Republic of Iran, travel as a tourist to Iran? I don't want to do any victim blaming, and I'm happy for every single person who can get out of this hell. But I think the reason why Ahmad Reza Jalali was not on the table anymore, or not any other EU citizen was on the table anymore, was that Johan Flodderus was a very, very high value hostage.
And what are your thoughts on that, Kaveh?
I entirely agree. I mean, I think what happened with Dr. Jalali is, I hate to agree, but I think that's true, that he just wasn't Swedish enough. I am not the kind of person that throws around charges of racism when it's unwarranted, but in this case, I really do feel like that was sort of at play. I share Mariam's frustration with the fact that a diplomat, knowing what sorts of games the Iranian regime plays, would travel to Iran, get himself into this situation, and then cause this hostage diplomacy to play out. I think there's a lot that we simply don't know about what happened behind the scenes. But whatever it is, it's very unfortunate.
And Mariam, as a hostage family member yourself, I'm sure on one hand you can understand how the families would want to do anything to bring their loved ones home. But just speaking on behalf of yourself and your own situation, do you think they went about it the right way? And what would you like to see happen for your own mother?
First of all, I'm a political activist, a human rights activist, so I would never agree in person for such a deal. But of course, as the daughter of a political prisoner who is nearly 70 years old and is being held more than 4 years in prison, I would love to see my mom in a plane leaving the Iranian airspace and on her way back to Germany. I think the problem that we see in the so-called Western democracies and Western countries is that they are all negotiating behind closed doors country with the Islamic Republic. We saw this last year when the Biden administration gave $6 billion to the Islamic Republic, frozen assets from South Korea, and 5 U.S. nationals were being released. We saw the same thing that happened with Hamid Nouri last summer. It's really, really sarcastic that it happens exactly 12 months ago when Asadullah Assadi, who was also convicted in a fair trial in Belgium to 20 years in prison because he tried to assassinate political dissidents in France, he was swapped with one Belgian aid worker who was imprisoned in Iran and 2 Austrian citizens. So we see there are always one-to-one deals. Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe and Anousheh Ashuri were released in March 2022, and the UK government gave 400 million pounds to the Islamic Republic of Iran. So we see prisoner swaps, we see money that is being paid, and everybody is doing their own business with the Islamic Republic of Iran. What we demand as hostage families is there need to be a common action. For example, we have right now at least 3 French citizens, at least 3 German citizens, and I'm sure there are much more which cases we don't know.
Wow, that's a lot.
Who are being held in the Islamic Republic. Why isn't the European Union able to create a task force to build or to make some efforts to end this hostage diplomacy? After the dirty deal with Hamid Nouri, if I would be the Islamic Republic of Iran, I would try this again and again because it works. It is working since 46 years. I think with the deal in Sweden, they even raised the price of my mother because now the Islamic Republic thinks, what can we get from Germany? Oh, maybe they even had a deal and now they think, oh, we can get much more. So I think we will have more hostages. It also harms the situation of the hostages who are on death row, like Ahmad Reza Jalali and German citizen Jamshid Sharmat. They might be executed. Who are going to answer the families of Jamshid Sharmat and Ahmad Reza Jalali when these 2 people, because they have no values anymore maybe for the Islamic Republic, get executed? And this is a huge, huge problem. And I'm really, really angry because most of the so-called Western democracies where when Gina Mahsa Amini died and the Women Life Freedom Uprising took place, they were all standing in front of cameras and they were cutting their hair and they were saying, we are with the people of Iran and we condemn the human rights violations of the Islamic Republic of Iran. To be honest, I don't believe any word anymore. These are all empty words, and what we see is that a war criminal, a murderer who is responsible for the killing of the uncle of Kaveh Shahrooz, for example, is now in Iran, on Iranian soil. He only spent 4 years in jail, and freedom fighters like Too Much Salehi are facing executions. Thousands of political prisoners have been executed in the last year. We have right now the number of political prisoners in the Islamic Republic is around 20K, and he is on Iranian soil. And the first thing he did after he was in Tehran, he did an interview and he was laughing at us, and he looked into the cameras and he said, look, you are refugees in foreign countries, but I am back on Iranian soil. And this is something the European Union and the Swedish government is responsible for.
That's a very good point. Kaveh, your thoughts on that?
I share all those thoughts. And I think the thing that resonated most with me and what Mariam said was this idea that, just 2 years ago, a lot of these same politicians would put out statements saying, we stand with the Iranian people, we do this, and, these very performative things about cutting their hair. But when the rubber hits the road, when they actually have, the ability to take some action against the Iranian government, they don't do it. The United States doesn't do it. Europe doesn't do it. And I think it says something about us as an Iranian community, as an Iranian opposition, that we haven't been able to convince the West. I mean, on the one hand, I'm very upset that the West is pursuing its own interests. But when I think about it rationally, Western politicians, that's really their role. They're supposed to pursue their own interests, and they're supposed to prioritize the lives of their own citizens over Iranian people. And I think it's really our role as members of a diaspora, as people who see ourselves as an opposition, to mobilize and bring political pressure to bear on these foreign governments to get them to behave in what we believe to be the right way. And we simply have failed. I mean, I think this speaks to a failure of our opposition movement. And I think that's one of those things that really was laid bare to me when I saw this Hamid Nouri news. 2 years ago, we had government officials, we had Emmanuel Macron meeting with Iranian dissidents. It looked like a moment where things might change. And within 2 years, Macron is now, meeting with Iranian officials again. When Raisi dies, there are moments of, silence in the United Nations. There are these kinds of deals being struck. As Mariam mentioned, billions of dollars are being given by the Biden administration to the Iranian government. All of the momentum that we had with the Women Life Freedom movement seems to have gone out the window. And frankly, I think, we as a diaspora and as an opposition have a lot of responsibility for that as well.
My next question is for the both of you, and Kaveh, we can start with you. What impact is the release of Hamid Nouri and this prisoner swap going to have on liberal democracies around the world, on human rights, and as you said, on the Women Life Freedom movement and for its allies?
I think across the board, it's a terrible occurrence, right? I think what it does is it really demoralizes the Women Life Freedom movement and the democracy activists. I think part of our calculation had been, that the West would potentially stand with us. And now we think that that's probably not possible, that we have been abandoned, and that, these governments will abandon us at the drop of a hat. And as far as other liberal democracies are concerned, I think Mariam touched on it. The more they engage in this kind of hostage diplomacy, the more they give into kidnappers and hostage takers, the more they can see their own citizens being taken hostage, right? I think what they're going to find is that the Iranian regime, for all its flaws, in some ways is very rational, and it responds to incentives. And what they've done now is they've created the incentive structure for the Iranian regime to take more hostages. And, the Iranian regime is going to do that. And the price of a hostage has now gone up. And so now they're going to do more of this stuff, and they're going to realize that the West is weak, that the West is not actually going to stand against them. And they're going to push on all fronts, not just the hostage front, but also on the terrorism front, also on the nuclear front. When they are up against a weak opponent, the Iranian regime takes advantage. The only times that the Iranian regime has ever been stopped in doing something has been when the West has actually stood firm. So, the common example given is with respect to the extraterritorial assassinations that Iran carried out. It kept doing it all through the 1980s and the early 1990s until Germany actually stood up as a result of the killings in Berlin at Mykonos restaurant and actually put some people on trial, put them in prison, And that's when that policy stopped. Now, that policy has restarted again in the last few years because, again, the West has been weak. It's only if we, in the West, take a firm stand against the Iranian regime's aggression that they will back off.
So, Mariam, is the West then weak against Iran for whatever reason?
I agree on everything what Kaveh just mentioned. I think they not only I even think they harm their own people because, in the future, the Islamic Republic can do assassinations in the West, they can do terror attacks in the West, and they know, even if they put us on trial, we can take some hostages, and they, after 2, 3, or 4 years, we can do a deal, and they are being released. So I think it's even if they are not thinking about the Iranian people or the Iranian diaspora, at least they should think about their own people on their own soil. But something I would like to add, because I'm a really optimistic person, I think the trial of Hamid Nouri was important, and I think it was for the justice-seeking movement, like the families of the killed prisoners, a very important momentum, because we had a global awareness on the 1988 massacre. The name of Raisi was mentioned because he was part of the death commission, and all this was very important, and we saw that it's possible to bring them in front of court. Of course, to swap him was a political decision, not a legal decision. He was convicted for war crimes and murder in an independent judiciary process. So I think that the justice-seeking movement should be very proud of themselves, because what they did and what they did make happen is a very, very important and huge step. But I agree with Kaveh that this move also shows us that we as the Iranian diaspora, we as the activists need to do much more to get the West not doing such negotiations with the Islamic Republic anymore. And we had the momentum 2 years ago, and unfortunately, I know the Iranian diaspora is also a very, very interesting bunch
That's
of
a good
people
word for
who
it.
are I don't find the right wording, as you see, but I think this should be also a lesson to us, to see if we don't put all our efforts in advocacy and lobby, in legal processes, we won't succeed. But there is no other way. We need to go on, and we are not going to give up, of course.
So in some ways, is Nouri's release, could it be a failure of the opposition itself, or is this just a win for Iran's hostage diplomacy tactics? What do you guys think? Kaveh, you can start.
Well, I think it's both. I think it's Iran was handed a victory. I think the West was weak, but the reason the West was weak is because, frankly, we, the opposition, haven't given it an alternative. We haven't had enough influence on the decision makers. They look to our opposition and they see a deeply fractured group of people who are really busy fighting each other for the most part, and they have no negotiating partner among the opposition. And so, if you're a decision maker in Stockholm or in Brussels or Washington D.C., and you have no opposition really to negotiate with, what do? Well, you deal with the devil that which is the Iranian regime, and you pay the price that they want. So I think all these things are interconnected: the failure of the opposition, the victories of the Iranian regime, and the cravenness and the weakness of the West. I mean, I think they all there's an interplay between all these different elements.
Mariam?
I really agree on all the points that Kaveh mentioned. I think it's a mixture of all the events that took place in the last, especially 2 years.
And it's not just Iran that uses this so-called hostage diplomacy. We saw on October 7th, Hamas using the hostages as bargaining chips, essentially. What impact is this decision going to have, not just on Iran, but on its terror proxies like Hamas and on the region at large? Is that going to destabilize the region even further? If we could talk about more of the far-reaching consequences of this decision.
Yeah, I mean, I think any time that the West shows weakness against dictatorial regimes, and I think it's really important that we start to think about dictatorial regimes kind of across the board, Iran and its proxies, obviously, but, there was the same sort of prisoner exchange that happened with Russia a little while ago with the WNBA player was exchanged for, a Russian arms dealer. These kinds of exchanges have been happening. Russia, China, Iran, this sort of axis of anti-democratic states, they seem to be working together. And the more weakness the West shows in the face of this kind of dictatorship, the more they're going to be emboldened. We've been talking in this conversation about Iran and the price of hostages, but I think it really signals to our anti-democratic opponents that the West does not actually care about these issues. It doesn't really care about human rights. It's willing to give in on these issues of principle and these core values, or we think of them as core values. And the more weakness that they see, the more that they're willing to push, and the more chaos they're able to cause. So it can happen with the Chinese government, or it can happen at low levels like the Houthis. When they see weakness and chaos in the West, they're ready to exploit it and capitalize on it.
And Kaveh, as a lawyer, what kind of impact will this have on legal standards and the rule of law?
Well, on that, I think I'm a little bit more optimistic. I'd like to think that the fact that universal jurisdiction was used in this case was a positive step. Mariam made the distinction earlier correctly of one being a legal decision and the other being political. Obviously, here the political decision kind of undermined the legal process, but I think the legal process itself worked really well, and I think we need more of it. These Iranian officials, they do travel to the West. They do it quietly, and they often move their money here on, secretly. But every once in a while, word gets out that one of them has traveled to the West. They're in Germany, they're in Canada, or whatever. And I think the Swedish example hopefully set a precedent that other countries can follow, and hopefully next time the legal process won't be undermined by political decisions.
And now let's talk about the psychological impact of all of this. I think that's something that hasn't been talked about a lot and isn't getting a lot of attention. There are some family members of, victims of Hamid Nouri who were either killed, tortured by him, who were just too distraught. They were too broken to even speak about it. Mariam, as a hostage family member yourself, can you talk about the psychological impact that this is all having?
I talked to some families of the justice-seeking movement who were also testifying in front of the court of Hamid Nouri after Hamid Nouri was released. And I'm always very fascinated about the power they have. They are very, very strong. And, they are having this fight almost since 4 decades. So I'm sure what I've heard from them was, of course, they're very disappointed, but they said the same thing Kaveh just said and I said, is that the legal process was important. It was good that he was convicted. It was a condemnation of the Islamic Republic of Iran, in fact. So was very fascinated the way they deal with this dirty prisoner swap. But I also talked to the wife of Ahmad Reza Jalali, and this was very, very heartbreaking. I called her 1 hour after the information was leaked that he was released, and she was crying on the phone, and she was shouting, and I said, "Are you sure that Ahmad Reza is not in the deal?" I was really hoping that she's going to say, "He's on the plane, don't worry, we are not allowed to talk about it," or something like this. And she was really so heartbroken because she realized that her husband was left behind.
And did she even know? Did she even get any advance notice? Or
no,
oh, wow.
no. This is also something which is really, really shocking, that they even did not prepare her in any form, that they did not say, look, we have a deal. We tried our best to get Ahmad Reza into the deal. It was not possible. But I don't know anything. She learned through the media, through my phone call,
that's
that
shocking.
he was released. And the foreign ministry gave her 1 week ago appointment for 2nd July. So in 2 weeks, they knew 1 week ago that they are going to do this deal, and that they are only making her wait 3 other weeks. So this is really something which no one can imagine, what this does to the family members of hostages being left behind. Ghazaleh Sharmat, the daughter of Jamshid Sharmat, she's in California. She woke up, I think, 6 hours after the information was leaked. She called me and said, please tell me this is not true. Tell me that all of our family members are being released. And I said, no, they are not released. They are still in prison, and only 2 Swedish citizens were released. So this is something which is very, very heavy on our shoulders, because, Hamid Nouri was something some family members really put a lot of hope in it. I did not put any hope in that because I thought they are not going to release him, to be honest. But I never thought, I hope my mom is being exchanged with Hamid Nouri, because I'm sure my mom, as someone who lost a lot of friends in the 1988 killings, would prefer to stay in Evin prison than being exchanged with Hamid Nouri.
Wow.
But of course, if this would happen, I would say go on the plane. Don't discuss. That's also a truth. But I think a lot of families, like Ahmad Reza Jalali's, it was so clear that he was being used as a bargaining chip in the Hamid Nouri case. So to me, it was always clear, when Hamid Nouri is going to be exchanged, it's going to be Ahmad Reza Jalali. What is left for Vida, his wife? What is there anything left that she could hope for, if they are not even able to secure his release when they are releasing such a criminal like Hamid Nouri? Today, a voice message from Ahmad Reza Jalali was released from Evin prison, when he's directly talking to the Prime Minister of Sweden. It is heartbreaking. He said, I'm spending 3,000 days, 8 years in Evin prison under the threat of execution, and you left me behind. And this is something no one can understand. What we are going through every day is a hell. Every day you have to think of what is going on in Evin prison. Is your mom okay? Is your dad okay? Is your husband okay? And your government is always telling you the same sentence, empty sentence. We are trying our best to secure the release of your family member, and at the end we see they do such a dirty deal and they leave their own citizens behind.
And Mariam, if the Swedish government or any EU officials are watching or listening to this podcast right now, what is your message to them?
Okay, I try to be very diplomatic in the words I choose right now. You are responsible if anything happens to anybody you left behind. You lied to us. You are lying to us since years. You are only doing what is good for your own interests. You left our people behind. And I really have a serious question for you. Would my mom be released, or Ahmad Reza Jalali, if their names would be Michael or Melinda?
Well, and Kaveh, for you, what is your message as someone who, I mean, you were a young child when you lost your uncle in that way, such a tragic way. What is your message?
My message is that the ripples of what Hamid Nouri was responsible for have been felt in thousands upon thousands of lives. This was my uncle. My life was really tragically altered as a result of what happened to him. My mother's life was frankly ruined as a result of what happened to her brother. My grandmother, who lost a son, her life was ruined. And, just play this out across thousands and thousands of families. And what the Swedish government did here was to basically say, all of that doesn't matter. Your lives don't matter. The tragedy that played out doesn't matter. So what I would say to Western governments is, these are oftentimes your citizens too. These are people that live in your countries. And it's not fair for you to treat them this way. So really, I think it's time for these Western governments to come together to create this common front and just stand up to the bullying of the Islamic regime. There are levers of power that the West has. We are not so powerless against the Iranian regime. The Iranian regime's officials come to the West. They store billions of dollars in the West. They send people here. We hopefully our intelligence agencies and security agencies are tracking this stuff, and we can put an end to it. We can bring pressure to bear on the Iranian regime. It's time for us to do that. It's time for us to take these threats seriously. And regrettably, we haven't been doing that, but we ought to be doing better as a result of what we've seen. Let's not repeat this mistake again.
Thank you so much to you both for such an impactful podcast session today. I really appreciate it. I know there was a lot of emotion that in what you guys were saying today, and a lot of heart. So thank you very much to you both.
Thank you for having us.
And we'll see you next week for Eye for Iran.